Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing well on this Tuesday. It's been a busy, it feels like already been like Wednesday at this point, but it's been a busy couple of days. But the BYU football program got a major recruiting win yesterday when Pineview High School tight end Brock Harris announced that he will be a BYU Cougar. Now, if you go by recruiting rankings, it is the biggest recruiting win for BYU in terms of a star-rated athlete since Ofa Mohetau. And those of you who know who Ofa Mohetau is, that is a deep cut. And you have been paying attention to BYU recruiting rankings literally since the early 2000s. Ofa Mohetau was a five-star offensive lineman, for those of you not in the know, who committed to BYU as a five-star offensive lineman out of Euless Trinity High School in Texas, but then never enrolled at BYU and played very lightly for a short time at Texas Tech and then really never emerged. I think he may have played in the Arena League for a short time, but he was a huge recruiting win in the heyday under Gary Croton. If you want to call it a heyday, your description may differ, but regardless, huge recruiting win yesterday for Brock Harris as a bona fide four-star prospect verging on five-star territory to commit to BYU. I talked about him in a special edition. If you want to pause the podcast and go back and listen to that, feel free, and you can jump right back in here. But the bigger point to be made is Brock Harris is an elite athlete. I had a person that I talked to shortly after he announced his commitment that's inside the BYU football program who called him, quote, a freak. And they mean that in the best possible way. And they also added this later. Brock Harris could show up to BYU right now and start for us. Wow. Didn't expect that to come out of somebody's mouth inside the BYU football program, but that's what was sent to me. And that tells me everything I need to know about BYU and what they expect from Brock Harris down the line. Now, he has mission plans, TBD, if he goes right out of high school, or maybe he decides to run it back and play for a year for BYU before embarking on a mission. But regardless, BYU had a top-tier talent. Can his commitment to BYU, can that have the cascading effect and start to really help BYU reel in some of the top tier prospects they're chasing in this 2026 cycle? I've talked about it on this podcast, but the 2026 recruiting class with the connections of the top shelf athletes that are A, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, B, have connections to BYU, a la a guy like Brock Harris, whose dad Todd played at BYU back in the day, so BYU legacies, and just see guys who are here regionally in the Intermountain West or in Big 12 territory that BYU's made inroads on in recruiting. If BYU can win some of these recruiting battles, they could put together potentially their best recruiting class literally ever. BYU had was it 24th or 25th in 2010 when the Jake Heaps class signed. Remember that Zach Stout, Ross Oppo, and the like. And that was a pretty highly thought of class. But BYU right now with the Brock Harris commitment is 36th in the early runnings of the 2026 recruiting cycle. So good spot to be in. If BYU wants to be a true force in the Big 12, if they truly want to be a Big 12 contender year in and year out, they've got to be top 30 at the very worst annually in recruiting rankings. So they're just outside of that right now. But this 2026 class has got, I'm telling you, top shelf talent that BYU is in on. I will echo some of what Jeff Hansen, our good friend of the podcast, go check out his work at givehimhellbrigham.com. It's an incredible website. It does a great job. He wrote a great piece yesterday talking about Brock Harris's commitment and what it could mean for BYU in the 2026 cycle. I'm going to quote from this, and he says this. As good as Harris is, and trust me when I say there's no underselling how good he really is, and I echo that, Brock Harris is absolutely elite. He might not even be the highest rated player to commit to BYU in the class of 2026. Sitake's staff, speaking of Kalani Sitake, has put BYU in a strong position for five-star quarterback Ryder Lyons. We talked about that yesterday. Our friends at Locked On Ole Miss and Locked On the Portal believe that BYU's in the front-runner seat for Ryder Lyons, and I have heard similar sentiments. Talanoa Ely, who is a four-star linebacker prospect, has taken an unofficial visit to BYU. I'm getting back to Jeff's words here, and is scheduled to take an official visit next month. Those two are rated higher than Harris today. And like I said, Harris is already verging on five-star territory. He also mentions this. BYU is also making a ton of progress with Bot Mulatalo out of Lone Peak High School here in Utah. Malachi Lee, one of the top-rated prospects. He might be the top-rated prospect out of Hawaii this year. Jaron and Kenan Pula out of Timpview High School, who are committed to UCLA, but are both really phenomenal athletes and potentially could flip. Kawe Akana from Orem High School, Jax Tanner out of Idaho, Braxton Lindsay. There is no shortage of and by the way, every one of these guys I've just mentioned are four-star prospects. If not, the Pula brothers, they may be high 3-star territory, but I believe they're both 4 stars. These are the type of players that can take BYU from a middling program that they could pay off every few years with development of winning 11 games like they did this past season and push them in the territory where they are a perennial Big 12 contender. That is how important this 2026 recruiting class is for the BYU football program. They need to nail it. And getting Brock Harris, that is an incredible start. And that doesn't even preclude what they've already added. Ty Getchie, who's also a tight end prospect, he's a phenomenal athlete. He spurned other SEC and Big Ten offers to pick BYU. He is a member of the church from Cherry Creek, Colorado, and he picked BYU. You also mentioned Justice Brathwaite, his dad, Reynaldo. He's a BYU legacy. Justice had other Power 4 offers coming out of the Arizona prep ranks. BYU's done a really, really good job on the recruiting side of things right now for BYU football. And the funny thing is Nusi Taumoepeau, who are probably screaming at me, what about Nusi, Jake? Funny thing is, Nusi counts for the 2025 recruiting cycle. Yes, he had just signed with BYU, but he had signed with Stanford, and he's a member of this past recruiting class. Yeah, he's a bona fide 4-star prospect, a force off the edge, and should be an elite pass rusher for BYU. I love what BYU is doing right now in the recruiting sphere, and it's extending from BYU basketball to BYU football. And the nice part is it doesn't show any signs of stopping anytime soon. I sincerely hope BYU continues to capitalize on this 2026 class because the momentum they generated by going 11-2 last year cannot be overstated. It showed that BYU, just 2 years into their tenure as a Power 5 program, can compete amongst the big boys. There have been so many people out there who were naysayers saying that BYU feasted on lesser than schedules when they were in the independent era and back in the Mountain West and WAC days, and they simply put couldn't compete against a Power 5 type schedule. That was the parlance in the day. Now it's Power 4. Well, BYU just went 9-1? Whatever it was against, no, it was 10. Regardless, they won a bunch of games against Power 5 opposition, 9 of them, if I recall correctly. And the nice part is they are poised to absolutely surpass that this year if everything goes according to plan. They bring back a ton of weapons from this year's team. And what helps recruiting more than anything else is showing you are a consistent winning program. That's what young men care about. Yes, BYU can crow about being QBU and go back through their pantheon of quarterback greats from the past 50 years. Yes, they can crow about the national championship in 1984, which is now 41 years in the rearview mirror. That doesn't necessarily apply to these young men who are 16, 17, 18 years old. They were born in the 20-aughts when BYU's had the likes of John Beck, Max Hall, Zach Wilson, Jaron Hall. They've had some really good quarterbacks, but consistent winning football programs at the highest level of football, which is what Jake Retzloff and BYU accomplished last year. If they can go out there and prove themselves once again on the biggest stage possible this coming season, who knows where this 2026 class could go for BYU, but it absolutely could be downright elite and, quite frankly, program changing for Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars. All right, a guy that, besides Brock Harris, because we don't know when Brock Harris will ultimately show up at BYU, it could be as soon as 2026. It could be as late as 2028, depending on his mission plans. A guy who figures to step into a more prominent role, and quite frankly, BYU needs him to be a star this coming season if they want to succeed at a high level, is Carsen Ryan. Yes, he played at UCLA. Yes, he played at Utah, and he's finally spending his final season playing for the BYU Cougars. What does he hope to accomplish in a BYU uniform as the hometown kid comes back home, quite literally, because he played at Timpview High School just up the road from BYU? What does he hope to accomplish in a Cougar uniform? He'll tell you next in an exclusive conversation right here on Locked On Cougars.